Hi Shay, thank
Hi.
you for joining me for our Women Who Make It Happen. This is the second edition of our podcast series. Do you want to give a little intro about yourself? It'd be much appreciated.
Thanks for having me. I'm Shay. I work in financial crime prevention. I currently head up a financial crime operations team for NatWest Boxed. Formerly known as Mettle, we are a business banking app, but we're also moving into banking as a service as well. So that's why we've transitioned into NatWest Box. I've been in financial crime prevention for about, oh my goodness, maybe showing my age now. I think it's been more than 8-9 years. So I sort of started off as like a junior fraud analyst and then have just worked my way up slowly from then. So yeah.
Thank you. Well, it would be great to understand a little bit more about how you got to where you are today. So if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about your journey.
Yeah, I remember when I was at uni, I wanted to work in something crime related. I did criminology as a degree. So I had convinced myself that I wanted to fight crime, and I decided I was going to be a crime scene investigator just because I watched loads of CSI and it just looked really cool. So I was like, that's what I want to do. But it's not actually as glamorous as it seems when you watch it on TV. So as I was going through like my modules and stuff, I realized there were some quite heavy topics when you're thinking about things like violence and all these type of things. And I was like, I don't know if I could do that as a career. I don't know if I've got the stomach for it, but I do want to fight crime in some kind of way. And then I was like, but then I don't want to work for the police. And I was like, so then what do I do? And then I did a module on white collar crime. And then that spoke about fraud and bribery and corruption. And I thought, okay, I think this is something that I think I could do. But even then I didn't know like how you get into it or anything. And I finished uni, I was working at the bank. I was working for Santander and I did some modules on like anti-money laundering and stuff from training. And then I thought, oh, this seems really interesting. And then we always had to look out for suspicious activity on people's accounts as part of the role anyway. So again, started to open up my eyes to investigating fraud. And then I moved to the Financial Ombudsman Service, and that's where I sort of solidified that I wanted to get into fraud prevention, because I started doing complaints and I was looking at fraud cases. So cases where customers had been victims of fraud and they had then brought the case to FOS because they'd not gotten anywhere with the bank. And then I got to actually investigate some cases myself and I thought, yep, this is what I want to do. But the challenge came trying to actually break into the industry initially, because a lot of places wanted experience. And whilst I had transferable skills, I didn't have direct experience investigating fraud. So it was a bit of a struggle. I think I was at FOS for about 2.5 years before I eventually moved on. And then I moved to fintech payday lending company, Wonga at the time. And I remember initially when Wonga reached out to me for the role, I knew that they had like quite bad press at the time. So I was a bit like, oh, do I really want to work there? But then I was like, but this is a fantastic opportunity because they're literally offering me this role that I want to get into, and this could be my foot in the door, and it's a fintech and it seemed like a fun place to work and it seemed like they were really turning things around. It was the best decision I ever made. Best decision I ever made, because that's where my career really solidified. I started off as a junior fraud analyst, then went on to leading a team, trading up a new team, got to go to South Africa and deliver a project there for financial crime training, and then moved on to another role as a manager somewhere else. But I feel like if I didn't work there and if I didn't have that experience, I wouldn't have sort of propelled to where I am now.
Where did that interest for a fintech come from for you initially then?
So I think I'd just been I didn't know what industry I wanted to go into. So I had it in my mind that I wanted to investigate fraud, but I wasn't really clear on the industry. I thought financial services seemed the most, like it made the most sense because that was what I was familiar with working in the bank, working at FOS. And then I guess getting to investigate certain complaints and seeing like some fintechs that would pop up and seeing some of their names and researching what they did. And then I think some of the laid back nature, I suppose, like some of the fun quirkiness of the environment really appealed to me. And I thought, yeah, I want to work somewhere like that, somewhere that, you know, I can wear what I want and I can like, you know, have food at work and things like that. So I was a bit younger then. So I think those things generally probably appealed more to my nature at the time.
And then that's led you to where you are now as head of financial crime operations. So the last 4 or 5 years have been within...
So still all fintech. Well, actually, after leaving Wonga, I actually transitioned to still tech, but I transitioned into dating. So I actually worked for Badoo, which was an umbrella of, I say not really an umbrella, it was more of a part of Bumble. So I worked there for about a year, I think it was. And I was doing fraud and payments management there, but very different to what I was doing at Wonga. And I think being there, as much as I enjoyed working there, it was so much fun. It was like genuinely like one of the best offices I've ever worked at in my life. I used to get my nails done every like 2 weeks, food every day. It was great. But I had to make a decision of, all right, you're enjoying working here, you're enjoying the environment and the people, but you're not getting the experience you need to really propel your career. So it was actually a tough one, because I was like, I've got quite a good setup here, but if I stay here, it's going to derail me a little bit, because I wasn't actually getting to investigate the fraud in the way in which I needed to. It was quite low level stuff. And my role started to become more of like a project manager, looking at payments and looking at one point I was looking at like PCI DSS, which is like information security stuff. So I realized very quickly that if I stay here, it's going to derail my career. And I know that I wanted to progress in financial crime. So I had to just make the decision of, you're having fun here, but you know that you're not going to progress your career if you stay. So then I started looking at other roles, and that's how I met you.
Indeed.
Yeah. So then, and then I started talking to you guys about a role at Yaya Finance, and that was a fraud manager role. But at the time, they were looking for someone to come in and basically head up that area and grow out the fraud team and grow out all the fraud processes. And I thought, that's great, because that gets me back into financial services. I get to grow. It's a level senior above what I was doing. So that then put me back in the right direction after that.
Yeah. Very good. From your experience so far then within financial crime, what have you found the most challenging for you?
I think there's a couple of things. I think it's really important, if you're working in a financial crime space, to ensure that you've got a leadership team that understands what you do, and a leadership team that buys into what you're trying to do as well, and that there isn't that resistance, because I think that sometimes you can be seen as a bit of a blocker, as opposed to, we're trying to protect the business, we're trying to protect the business from losing money, we're trying to protect the customers. But you know, if you're working for somewhere where it's hyper growth is the focus, if you're now saying, right, I think if you put this feature in, it's going to cause this much fraud, therefore you can't do it. But then you're like, but then if I put that feature in, we're going to make millions of pounds. That can be quite difficult, I think, sometimes having those conversations and being confident enough to have those conversations with like senior members of staff to say, this decision, whilst it might be a great decision for growth, it's probably not the best decision from a financial crime perspective.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important to work somewhere where financial crime is not just a tick box department to have. It's like they actually care about, you know, reducing risk and implementing the right processes. And I've been quite fortunate actually, the last couple of places I've worked, and where I work now is exactly like that. But I've definitely experienced that at certain points where you're there because you have to be. It's like a regulatory thing to have like a function like mine, but you're not always necessarily considered in some of the decisions. People just go off and do stuff and then tell you afterwards, and you're like, well, that's going to cause millions of pounds of fraud. I wish you spoke to me about it first. So I think that I would say is probably one of the bigger challenges. Yeah.
And I think with financial crime, it is very much the balance, isn't it, between being that voice of challenge sometimes, as opposed to the voice of, okay, go ahead and do it. So I appreciate it's sometimes a difficult situation to be in.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. How have you overcome that then throughout your career? Or the examples you mentioned where maybe a couple were a little bit more difficult?
I think I've learned over time that when you are dealing with senior stakeholders, you can talk all you want, but that doesn't really get far. I think they understand facts and they understand data. So I think if you're able to present things to them in a way that they understand, then it's usually an easier conversation. But if you're just sort of going in and you're saying, no, you can't do that, then you will get the pushback. But I think if you can present and you can say, look, like this is what the data shows, if you do this, then it's usually okay. That's typically how it's worked for me.
Yeah. And I am aware you were nominated, weren't you, for the Women in Governance, Risk and Compliance previously, earlier this year. So congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, I was actually nominated twice. I don't know how that happened. I don't know, because the first year I know that they reached out to me to submit some information. And the second year, I don't remember if I did, but I was like, oh wow, well, that's nice.
What was that from? What led you to get the nomination?
So I think they had reached out to me actually. So they had reached out to me. I guess they'd seen my profile on LinkedIn, seen my career history, and thought that I'd be a good fit for that nomination. And then they just like asked for some information about my career today, the types of things I do at work, outside of work, and then then they put me there, and I was like, oh, okay, great.
Well, it's certainly a great feat, and especially for inspiring younger female talent in the industry. So clearly our podcast series and interview series is very much based upon women in leadership and successful journeys throughout their careers. So what advice would you give to younger female talent coming into financial crime or specifically financial services?
I would say, don't be afraid to put yourself out there. Like I always say, take up space and don't be afraid to do so. I think that sometimes we think we need to have it all. We need to know everything. I feel like, I don't know if that's more of a women thing. I think maybe it's more of a me thing actually. I think sometimes I've gone through phases in my career where I feel like, oh, I can't do that job because I need to know everything, or, someone else might be more senior than me. But then it's like, when you actually get into the role, I'm like, oh yeah, I can do this. I don't know why I was doubting myself. So I think sometimes we think we need to have all the boxes ticked before we move into certain roles or into certain phases of our career, but not necessarily. I think if you've got enough, you've got the transferable skills, you've got the experience, and you've got the willingness to learn, you can still move forward and you can still progress. You don't have to feel like you have to have everything before you move forward. And that's not to say that you shouldn't make sure that you have the knowledge and the experience to do the role. But for me, I've really pushed myself sometimes where I've been like, okay, this is a bit of a bold move, but I know I can do it. And I've just led with that. Even if I didn't necessarily have all of the credentials, I've been like, I know I can do this. So I'm going to push and see what's the worst that can happen. If I don't do it, or if it doesn't work out, then I learn from it and then I apply it elsewhere.
I was going to ask, just touching upon that, how have you dealt with maybe those potential setbacks or the results not being what you would have wanted if you hadn't have got through to that career opportunity?
I think over time, as you get more senior in your career, you do build up a bit of resilience. So I think I've naturally just become a bit more resilient, but I think that I always know that there's opportunities out there for me. So it might not be this one, but there will be something out there for me. So I don't ever see it as like, that's the end. I'll be like, okay, maybe it's not this one, but it will be another one, or there will be another opportunity for me, even if it's not this one. And then when something else does come up, it's like, okay, now I know why I didn't get that one, because this was where I was meant to be.
Yeah, really interesting. And then for you in your role now, we certainly in our industry, we get asked a lot about D&I policies, adhering to requests from clients. From a diversity point of view, for you and your team, how do you ensure that's balanced?
That's a good question. I think there's definitely a way to go in the industry in general in terms of getting that right, because I feel like diversity looks like different things to different people. Like for me, I'm a Black woman, so I might look at, when I think about diversity, I think of everything, but then obviously being a Black woman is really important to me. So I don't think I look at it from a lens of, okay, I'm only going to hire Black people. I just look at it from a lens of, I want to be more inclusive and I want to make sure that we're hiring the best people for the job. And if it is that a Black person is the best person for the job at this time, then great, even better. But I try to just look at it from more of an inclusive angle, and I try to make sure that there is good amounts of representation across the board when I am thinking about hiring. But I wouldn't say I necessarily box anyone in or seek out anything specifically, but I just make sure that during the hiring process, is it inclusive enough? Do we have a broad range of CVs, or are you just giving me CVs from one area? Have we reached out to, across our networks and things like that? So that's the kind of conversations I would have with our people team, or when I'm looking at CVs, those are the kind of things I would look at.
Okay. What challenges have you encountered maybe around the D&I policies, either from internal and then the ramifications of that, or when you are going through that process, the challenges that have arisen?
I think I've probably been a little bit more shielded from maybe some of the bigger challenges, because I feel like that's usually maybe not as exposed, I would say. But I think that I think it's more just people just not fully understanding. I think that's probably one of the challenges, people not understanding what that means. And I think even that I probably have a way to go in understanding stuff as well. But I think that's probably it. It's if you talk about diversity and inclusion and then someone says, oh, but we just hired a woman the other day. And it's it's not just about that though. And you're not going to just say that because you hired a woman, you fix all of our diversity and inclusion issues. Not necessarily. What does that representation look like? And it's going to look different for different people, but it's just acknowledging that, and maybe even just putting your hands up and saying, we don't have all the answers right now. We know we've got a long way to go, rather than mask it as, yeah, we're doing great because we've just hired a woman, or we've just hired a black person, or we've just hired this person. So I think it's more around that sense of ownership that there's a way to go is probably where I've seen a bit of challenge. I guess I've worked for like a big company, like NatWest is huge. So I think they're like, yeah, I think they're doing pretty well in terms of like diversity and inclusion, to be honest. But definitely over the course of my career, I've probably experienced some maybe not so inclusive, or what hasn't appeared to be as inclusive at times, particularly around senior leadership, I would say. I think senior leadership, it only occurred to me when I had somebody reach out to me on LinkedIn saying, oh, I've never seen a black head of department before. And I was like, and it never really...
Really? You actually had that comment?
Yeah, she said it in a nice way. She was just like, oh, you know, that it gave her a bit of inspiration, because I guess she's a bit junior. I think she just graduated from uni and she's thinking about going into like a financial crime compliance role. And she said that like seeing me in the role, like sort of inspired her that, oh, actually that is a career that she can go down. And whilst it was like nice and flattering, it was also a bit concerning, because I was like, oh, so then does that mean there's not enough of us? Or is it that we're just not visible? Or like, you know, it kind of got me thinking. And I was like, whilst it's good that people can look at me for that representation, I don't want to be the only one. I don't want to be the only one waving the flag. I want to feel like there is a good level of representation across the board. And I think there is, but I do think that like the more senior I've gotten, I don't necessarily always see women or black women actually in my area, but that doesn't mean it's not there. I just don't see it as much.
That's really interesting. I'd never even heard of
I hadn't really thought about it deeply until when I got that message actually. And then I was like, actually, yeah, like, you know, I mean, now in my current senior leadership team, there is now 3 women actually in it.
Okay.
But for a while it was just me. But I hadn't even necessarily noticed that, because like one thing that was good is like there's the inclusivity is there. I've never ever felt like, oh, I'm the only woman, or that I'm not listened to, or that I'm not included. Like my senior leadership team and my peers are really, really good in making me feel included in stuff. So I just never didn't cross my mind. Didn't even notice until she said it, and I was like, oh, okay. But yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Well, clearly at NatWest Boxed, there's a good balance there.
Yeah.
And you've mentioned you've got certainly the buy-in from a senior leadership perspective. It'll be interesting to touch upon the ones that you felt weren't as inclusive, or from a senior leadership point of view, it wasn't as balanced. So what were the challenges there, do you think?
I think I've worked somewhere where I was the only black head of department. In fact, I think I was the only
Did it come
woman.
down more to gender, or?
Bit of both, yeah.
Right,
so I think I was definitely the only, I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, it's been a while, but I'm pretty sure I was the only female head of department in that area.
Okay.
And then I was the only black head of department, I think, in the whole company.
Right.
And then in terms of the main like exco senior leadership team, I don't think there was any black people in there at all. And I think there was one, but then he left. And then there wasn't that many women either initially. And then slowly, like there started to be more women, but it was very, very male dominated at first. So I think it was more gender, I would say, than race, but yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, I mean, from my perspective, we're seeing more and more female talent professionals in SLT.
Yeah.
The CROs I work with who are female, and this is why we conduct these series, to empower women and make your voice heard. And I know you're quite an advocate of speaking in the community. You've done other events and talks, haven't you?
Yeah, definitely. I think particularly after receiving that comment, I think I was doing talks and stuff before then, but that was another sort of motivator to be like, okay, I need to put myself out there more, even if it's just for other young women to see that, like there are people doing these roles, and that they can do these roles if they like work hard enough, and that the representation is there. That's kind of one of the reasons why I keep putting myself out there, so that it can reach quite a wide network. And separate to this, I do have a YouTube channel actually, where I talk about career stuff, and I give out career tips, and I talk about how I've done my journey. Yeah. And I've met like so many young women off the back of that who have reached out to me for like career advice. Some of them, like if I've had roles come up, I've like referred them for roles and stuff. So I'm just continuously trying to put myself out there, even if it's a bit uncomfortable, just so that people do know that the representation is there.
Yeah. We'll have to line you up for one of our industry events talking about financial crime soon then, won't we?
Yeah, I mean, whenever you're ready.
No, I think your story is really inspirational and aspirational for young talent. So to all the young females out there, any parting advice from you, Shay?
Just don't give up. Don't give up. There's so much out there. Don't also limit yourself to what you think you know, because there's so much more than what you think you know, if that even makes any sense. There's like a wide network out there. Don't be afraid to reach out to people as well. I think one thing that I didn't really do early on in my career is actually just reach out to people on LinkedIn. The same way I've got all these young girls reaching out to me, I wasn't doing that. And I'm so proud of them for doing that, because it's like they're actually taking control of their own career, asking the right questions. Don't be afraid to reach out to people in the industry that you're interested in and ask them questions, ask to see how they can support you if they can. And just keep doing your best. I don't know how to explain it, but I think sometimes we can limit ourselves more than the world limits us. So I would say, like, you know, don't be your own blocker. Don't let imposter syndrome take over. Just push and just do the best you can.
Certainly a lesson I'll be taking from this as well, so thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me. It's been nice.